right. Well, greetings. This is William Woys Weaver. I'm being interviewed in my apartment at Delmont Apartments in Wayne, Pennsylvania. This is the 24th of April, 2026. That'll get the date in. And, there were several questions posed to me about what was it like to grow up a Quaker. And Kate.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kate Bainey. I'm a sophomore at Haverford College, and so I'm here to just ask a few questions about Haverford's Quaker history, and particularly the meeting. Yeah.
Well, I didn't grow
Right.
up in Haverford meeting. I grew up in Western Quarter. As I mentioned to you earlier, Kate, my parents decided they were going to buy a house, and this is the 1950s, and so they worked their butts off to pay cash, and they farmed me out to my grandparents. So I grew up with a grandmother who spoke the plain language, and I attended a High Street Friends meeting in Westchester. I would go there on my bicycle as a kid, and I went to the First Day School, spent some time at Westtown. I grew up among Quakers who still spoke the plain language, but they only used it amongst themselves. If outsiders came into the room, they flipped right away over into normal English, if you put it that way. But I got accustomed to using thee and thy and all of that. I had some cousins who refused to talk to me unless I used the plain language. So Mary Larkin Thomas, for one of them, was an unreconstructed Orthodox friend in the old conservative sense of the word. My family was attached to Birmingham Friends meeting. That's where most of my grandmother, grandfather, and most of that family are buried. However, I became clerk of Marlborough Friends meeting near Kennett Square in the 1970s, and I actually edited some interesting tracts for them on Quakerism, and I have copies of them here if you want to. I could hold them up for show and tell.
Yeah. Can you just tell us what you
Well, one of them, there was a foot washing that was written up in, I think it was the Friends Miscellany in the 1820s. The meeting actually formed out of a dispute between two Quakers, and they settled their dispute over water rights to irrigation for a field by one man coming over and washing the feet of the other. And this was a very humiliating thing, but it worked. And out of that came this meeting. And then the meeting was very concerned about the drift of Quakerism, and so they were always inviting speakers to come in. So I got to know most of the traveling ministers, if you want to call them that, because they would come to Marlborough, and we would have the Marlborough Evening Lecture Series. And one of the other pamphlets, Elton Trueblood from Indiana, Basis of Renewal, is all about why he thought Quakerism needed to go more Bible-oriented. And that's what happened to Marlborough. I left the meeting when I moved to Devon because I wanted to be closer, to have a meeting closer to me. And I had, in the 70s, traveled all over the East Coast and visited many, many meetings. So I knew sort of what I was looking for. And I had some good friends at Haverford. Mary Hoxie Jones was one of them, Rufus Jones's daughter, and Theodore Hetzel, who was a member of the meeting, and he was a professor at Haverford. I think he was in math. I'm not quite sure, but he was also a photographer. And so those two people more or less guided me towards Haverford, and I became a member in the early 80s.
Okay.
But I had attended before that many, many times.
Yeah.
That's basically how it happened. And actually, I was rather. It was refreshing in a way because I didn't have to be clerk of anything. Being clerk of a rambunctious meeting that didn't know its way was almost like riding a wild mule. And, so I had Quaker burnout, if you want to put it that way, and but I'm very grateful now because I have a, a member of the meeting brings me to meeting, and I'm very grateful that I have a way to get there. And I know we're all worried about what's going to happen to Friends and how we're losing members and not growing, and well, these are perennial issues. And it's not much I can do about it, but anyhow.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned having traveled around and got a sense of the different, concerns that each of the meetings had, and their different, ways of relating, say, like to the Bible or, Quaker practice. So, what was your sense of Haverford meeting? Where did you think that, shading in all of the nuances of the kinds of practices and beliefs that they had when you arrived?
Well, first of all, I'm a writer,
Yeah.
and probably a little bit too intellectual, if you want to put it that way. And the beautiful thing about Western Quarter is that an awful lot of the Quakers who belonged to that group of meetings were farmers. So the people were very down to earth. It was a whole different atmosphere, but it wasn't big on intellectual issues, if you want to put it that way. Most of the children, because they farmed, they didn't have. They could get exemptions from the military, kind of that sort of thing. So, being a pacifist for them was a whole different thing for a student at Haverford. I was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, and I had to go before the board, and they grilled me as to, was I authentic and all of that. And I told them the story of my own ancestors, and about an hour later, they just said, "Go away, leave us alone. We believe you."
Yeah.
And so I won. My parents were fine with that. My father and mother were members of Quaker meetings. So, my father was a Quaker, and he during World War II, he became a flight instructor at the Air Force Academy. He taught people how to fly airplanes. That was his way. He didn't kill anybody.
Right.
He wasn't carrying a gun. He wasn't on the battlefront. He was just teaching people to fly airplanes. So that was his way of dealing with it. I mean, it was not easy because we had Quaker great aunts and uncles who really didn't approve of that. And so they cut my father out of their wills, that kind of thing.
Wow.
So he paid the price for his compromise. But my own history is my weavers come from Switzerland. They were Anabaptists. We were radical religionists, if you will, long before Quakerism was born. I'm talking about early 1500s. And the Anabaptists in Switzerland became Mennonites in America. So George Weaver was my ancestor who was tortured to death for refusing to bear arms in 1639 in the castle of Ottenbach near Zurich. I went there and I had no idea that the Swiss would meticulously preserve the torture rooms with all the tools. It was a bit like an African American going to Africa and seeing a slave prison, I mean, it really knocked me over. And I said to myself when I saw that, I don't care, burn me at the stake. I'm a pacifist and no one's going to change me, and I'm doing this for you. So this radical pacifism goes way back. It's in my genes. And sometimes I get mouthy about it, and I just have to say, look, Will, let it go. We all have our own paths to follow.
Yeah.
But Theodore Hetzel was a very influential, a member of the meeting, very influential member for me, and he gave me, if I may, this book, which belonged to him, Friends and Indians. He was on the Indian committee of yearly meeting, and it has his book plate and everything in it. Mm-hmm. And he's the one who got me involved in Native American, the Lenape, and I've done work on them because we've got their seeds. But also, being a historian, if I may reach over here, let's not forget, they all knew who I was at Haverford because I'd already published Quaker Woman's Cookbook. Elizabeth Ellicott Lee was a member of Sandy Spring Friends meeting in Maryland. I spent a lot of time in that meeting talking to people. Though this has come out in a second edition, so with a nicer cover. This is a battered first edition. But anyway, I actually ask questions like, okay, if this is a Quaker Woman's Cookbook, what makes it Quaker? Is there a Quaker foodways? If not, what is it? I analyzed all of that in the book, and it was a very good exercise in asking oneself, okay, if this is who I am, why am I this way? Right. And so this book, interestingly enough, it attracted a lot of attention from people outside of Quakerism, and it was, in some ways, it was their first taste. And it was a draw. Some people did join Friends because they read this and they liked the message. So in a sense, that's my ministry. Mm. And I thought, well, okay, I cook because I've learned to do this, and I can do it rather well because I work for Gourmet Magazine. I'm in deep trouble if I can't cook at this point. But that's my ministry, and if you can reach people through the stomach, okay, that's one way to hit their spirituality, right?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
I've got a question about the Quaker cookbook in particular. To what extent were the things that you found yourself writing about related to your own experience, the kinds of things that you would have eaten in your close relatives and grandparents, and to what extent was it research? How did you go about doing that research?
Well, first off, my grandmother was my Quaker grandmother, Grace Hickman Weaver, to whom I dedicated this book, was an extraordinary cook. And she was the hospitality committee, if you will, all in one person. I learned to cook her dishes that she grew up with. You have to realize that her mother, Esther Hannum Hickman, also a Quaker, who spoke the plain language to everybody. I never met her, but I heard a lot about her through my grandmother. She was a graduate of Mrs. Rohr's cooking school, Philadelphia Cooking School, in 1884-85. I have a picture of her class, and most of the other girls in this class were Quakers. And my grandmother explained to me that Esther attended the cooking school because she wanted to prepare herself for marriage. And she married a Quaker who was a pork butcher, who had, this is Hickman, William E. Hickman and Sons. They made scrapple, so I grew up with the family recipe for scrapple. Okay. They had farmers market stands in Reading, Wilmington, and Westchester. So my grandmother's mom made pies and cakes and sold them for what she called pin money, and she made an awful lot of it. But it was an old Quaker family business, and that's what I grew up with.
Great, yeah.
And my great aunt was my great aunt Myrtle, was my grandmother's younger sister, and she was, as I said to you earlier, she was the Quaker party girl, oxymoron there, but she married an architect and had a house in Atlantic City, a house in Haddonfield, and a farm in Bucks County, and she's responsible for some of the Chinese things that I have inherited. She went to China with her husband in 1936 because he worked for the Vanderbilts, and the Vanderbilts sent them over there for some, I think, a collecting expedition, because there was a war on in China at the time, and a lot of people were selling things because they had no food, and so it was an opportunity to buy things cheap. I hope that they didn't take advantage of some poor innocent Chinese people, but those were the times, and they came back with this boatload of stuff that I ended up inheriting. But my great aunt was a very good person, and while she was a Bucks County party girl, she loved New Hope. She also had a very plain heart. So, and her first love was animals, so she raised Afghans and show cats and that kind of thing. So there were these dichotomies in the family: the four farmers out in Chester County, and a great aunt who married well, and I mean, it was a real mix.
Yeah.
Sort of Quakerism on lots of different levels.
Yeah. And do you think that simplicity still exists on each of these levels, just kind of in different permutations, as a Quaker value, I mean?
Well, there was a Quaker in New Jersey, in Mullica Hill. I spent a lot of time in Mullica Hill. I used to travel around to all the meetings, so I got to taste the flavor of each. Judy Suplee, who has passed away, put it, to answer your question, put it very succinctly. She said, there is nothing more complex than simplicity. And this is true, because each person has their own personal take on that. And while Marlborough Meeting has left Yearly Meeting, the meeting that I used to be clerk of, they've joined Ohio, the Conservative Friends. And they all dress plain. I think they buy Amish clothes. I mean, this is their way of being Quaker. But I ran into the clerk, as I was telling you earlier, this gets back to simplicity, at a gas station in Kennett Square. And there he was in his gray, plain, but very expensive suit, driving a Mercedes-Benz. And I walked over to him, introduced myself, and I said, can you explain this simplicity to me? Because I think that car was worth $250,000 at least, and to me that wasn't plain. But that's just my personal take, and I'm brazen enough to ask that question.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting story. Yeah.
May I ask it?
Yes.
Do you have a question?
No, go ahead.
So when you first came to the meeting in the 1970s,
Yes.
who were some of the members there, and what were how many people came to meetings?
Oh, this is a very good question, because when I attended,
You might want to repeat it.
the question is, who did I relate to, and what was meeting like when I attended it in the 70s? First of all, I would say sometimes it was standing room only. It was full of people and children. Well, there was Ted Hetzel. I related to him a lot because he was a professor, and I'm the intellectual type. There were other members of the meeting who were very wonderful, and because I inherited from my grandfather a seed collection, we spent a lot of time. They spent a lot of time bringing the first day school to my garden in Devon, and I can remember, I think it was Kate DeReal, brought the children out, and we did herbs from the Bible, and the children went and touched, pinched, smelled, and tasted each one of those herbs mentioned in the Bible. And there's no better way to teach children than direct like that, because each plant had its own little lecture to go with it. So we were doing a lot of things like that, which we don't do anymore.
But you may just have talked yourself into it.
Yeah, it seems like a great way to learn.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I donated the seed collection to a nonprofit because I had to vacate my house. Long story there. Uh, and the seed collection is now at Kutztown University. And they have given us an office building and eventually 10 acres of land. So the long-term goal is to use that collection as a teaching tool. But it's not under my oversight anymore. So hopefully there we could do field trips. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's very beautiful countryside up there. So that's one way to deal with it. I also was because of Ted talking to lots of Native Americans in the area, and that has kept up. And I'm in. Well, we have a right now. The nonprofit is in existence, but it will dissolve the end of June, and it'll all pass over to Kutztown University. But one of the board members is the seed keeper for the Shawnee Nation. He's on our board. So I'm very in close contact with lots of Native Americans, particularly the ones from this region. That interests me most because we've inherited, through the seed collection, a lot of their food plants. And they don't even know today how they used them years ago because nobody wrote it down. But we've got the plant material and we can reinvent ourselves. And my forthcoming book called Pepper Pot City, Philadelphia and the Foundation of American Cuisine has a whole first chapter on the Native American foodways, and also a great deal in it about the Quakers who contributed to the, how should I say, the personality of the Philadelphia food story.
Really? Wow.
So when that book comes out in October, I think there might be a nice discussion group waiting to happen at the meeting, because there are lessons in that book that are timeless.
Yeah. You mentioned Mary Hoxie Jones earlier, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any particular memories or stories you want to share about her?
Well, Mary was a very large woman. I don't know if any of you, did you ever meet? No. All right. But she was big, built. So she came across as this huge presence, and I mean, she had a personality that was very strong. All right. She was a poet.
Okay.
She was a very good poet. So she was intimidating without even opening her mouth. But when she started to talk, it was a completely different person. She was very sweet, kind, and down to earth and gentle. And this comes through in her poetry. I had the pleasure, when I was still living in Westchester, to have Mary Hoxie Jones and Elizabeth Gray Vining, both who were friends of mine, for dinner many, many times to the house. So I got to know them on that level, not just at meeting. They would often come to meeting together because they had moved to Kendall. It's one of those Quaker retirement communities out in Western Quarter, and Ted Hetzel moved out there as well. So there was all this back and forth in the cars sort of thing. But we had other members who were quite interesting in their own way. There was Margaret Collins. She was very elderly when I got to know her. She lived in this huge house on the campus of Bryn Mawr, and I think it now belongs to the college. Wow. I think Bryn Mawr College grew up on property that had been the Collins estate. I'm not quite sure, but she would put up Quakers from other parts of the country at her house and then bring them to meeting. So I remember there was a group of Quakers from Japan, and they stayed with her. I mean, it was this kind of thing happening all the time. And there was another friend, I can't remember his name. He was colorblind, but he was into orchids. Do you remember?
Howard
Howard Wood, exactly. Thank you.
I didn't know he was colorblind.
He was colorblind, and totally. And I said, well, how can you? But he was a photographer, a botanical photographer,